Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. I rise to address the Economics References Committee Future of Australian Naval Shipbuilding Industry report. Although I was not a member of that committee, I have read through the submissions and have been involved in this for some time, and as a Senator for South Australia and someone who is deeply concerned and involved in our defence industry and our defence force, have a great interest in this topic. Part of the reason shipbuilding is important is because of the capability it gives us in a number of areas around the innovation of design, around our ability to sustain ships effectively and in a cost-effective manner, as well as to repair and modify ships as appropriate. It's not all ships, just as it's not all pieces of defence equipment, but the important part is that to be a sovereign nation, we need to understand the competence and capacity that we need in our engineering workforce, whether they be in industry or in uniform, and in the infrastructure and capacity of industry to perform certain functions. The way we achieve that moving forward is to avoid the bookended projects that we've had in the past, and we've seen in things like Air Warfare Destroyer how that start-stop approach has killed off the investment in skills and infrastructure that we build for a given project. It stops, they all die, and then we face cost and risk when we start to try and rebuild that capacity down the track. There is a clear case to have an ongoing plan. One of the arguments that I believe is important to take on board is that defence industry actually provides one of the fundamental inputs to our defence capability. And so whilst a very welcome side product, if you like, of having defence industry here is the jobs and the investment in the economy, the most important part that the government, and bear in mind the government's primary responsibility is the national security of Australia, the reason we should be concerned about and take an interest in the viability of defence industry is that they are a fundamental input into defence capability. So we need to understand what are the elements of defence industry that we need to be viable in order to keep our defence force viable. And I've put forward a number of papers and discussions around the fact that the Capability Development Group should actually have ownership of planning out over the next 20 years, not just for the life of one project, but over multiple projects over at least a 2-decade period. In a rolling fashion, they should be updating what are the investments that the government needs to encourage industry to make, and where necessary the government needs to make to have the engineering and manufacturing competence and capacity that is required to support our defence industry. If we get that right, then not only will our defence force have more effective and available capabilities, we will have better informed decision-makers within the military, within government, which is the basis of being a sovereign nation, and importantly, if we choose the right projects to invest in, to have that work done on shore, we will have a better return to the economy. And I'd just like to talk through that a little more. Professor Joran Roos, who's now based in South Australia but has worked extensively overseas, brings a focus to work that has been done in Northern Europe, it's been done in North America, it's been done in the UK, where for defence projects, and I highlight here we're talking defence projects, there is a strong case that can be made that the second-order effects or the spillover effects of investing in industrial innovation and capacity in a country returns to that economy over a period of time, a decade or more, multiples of anything from around 1.6 in the UK for their shipbuilding through to the US, multiples up to 6 for some of their aerospace projects. Now, this does not hold for other sectors, and people often quote the automotive sector and argue that spillover effects can't be measured and they're not effective. We just have to look at the money that's been invested in people like Holdens and Fords here, and yet they're closing down. The difference between other sectors and defence is that in other sectors, the public have the option to choose whether or not they will purchase those cars. If they want to go and buy a Hyundai or a BMW, they can do that. And so there's not a certain market. there's not a certain time frame for a particular product that's developed. The reason this works and can be quantified for defence is because you have one customer who's normally going to operate a piece of equipment for at least 10 to 15 years, sometimes 20 to 30 years. And so you have an almost guaranteed quantity that are going to be acquired. You have a through-life support program put in place. You have an upgrade cycle put in place. And so all the elements that contribute to second-order effects are there in a defence acquisition. And that's why it stands alone compared to others. And so for some projects, not all, projects that are low complexity, that don't involve a lot of innovation, the theories and the quantifiable effects are not there, which is why we shouldn't necessarily rush to try and do everything in Australia. But there are some areas where complex projects requiring systems integration and innovation clearly have, and it's demonstrable and measurable, the spillover effects that will give us those engineering skills that will deliver the ability for us to be a smart customer, to have a sovereign capability as a nation, to understand our equipment, its shortcomings, its effectiveness, so that our warfighters have the best equipment and the decision makers, whether they be logisticians, people involved in the sustainment or at a political level, have the information they need to make decisions that are in the best interest of the nation. And there are a number of examples that I can provide in both the maritime and particularly the aerospace sector, which is my own background, where the ability to understand, modify and certify aircraft has saved the Commonwealth significant amounts of money. Where we have lost those engineering competencies because we haven't planned this out over time, we see disaster. For example, the collapse of the amphibious fleet in 2011. And Navy has now had to spend a large amount of money trying to recreate and restore the engineering and technical competencies to actually understand and oversee the engineering to ensure the seaworthiness of its ships. And so there is an investment that is appropriate for governments to make in the engineering competence and capacity in both uniform and industry if we're going to sustain a capability. And that fundamentally is why we should be supporting shipbuilding here. To the particular terms of reference of this inquiry, it was looking at the supply ships and looking at why they were not built here in Australia. Looking through the submissions, one of the things I see is that it's a constant theme that the people such as BAE Systems and ASC, some of the major shipbuilders here, recognised that they couldn't deliver in the time frame that the government needed in order to replace the supply ships. The time frame is important because if you look at the decision point to actually get ships into service, the AWD, which is now currently just past the peak of its workforce engagement, the decision to actually get ASC to be the shipbuilder was made in 2005. The decision on the design to go to Navantia was made in 2007. And so between 2005 and now, we're talking 7 to 9 years between those two decisions and now. And so clearly if we wanted a project to continue that workforce and that investment, the supply ships was never going to cut it because it wouldn't be delivered in time. And that's why the way forward to actually sustain that investment that has been made, to their credit, by the South Australian Government in TechPort, in ASC, by BAE Systems and others, in the ability to design and manufacture ships or understand the design and manufacture ships, the way to do that is the Future Frigate project. And the reason that's viable is that with the investment that the government has made of some $78 million to establish the viability of integrating the CEA radar and the Saab 9LV combat system into the existing AWD hull, it means that we can commission early on the manufacture of hull blocks which will keep those skill sets going. When the fit-out of the 3 AWDs is finished, we then start looking to assemble and fit out the hull blocks for Future Frigate. And what we start generating is economies of scale. We've proven with the ANZAC project that we are capable of equaling, if not bettering, world's best practice and productivity, but it always takes a number of ships. And so by continuing the lineage of that design around the hull, by integrating Australian systems, we achieve a continuity of build which gets a return on the investment we've made in those skills and capability. It gives us the kind of engineering competence and capacity to deliver sovereignty to the nation, good capability to defence, and a return, importantly, to the Australian economy, which for South Australia also has the flow-on effect of those jobs. And I seek